In tonight's news edition, in a May Day message, His Majesty the King says Jordan moves forward confidently, praising the nation's workers as builders of the future. Lawmakers condemn a recent spike in campus violence and say stopping riots is a collective national responsibility. And Syria's president urges his supporters to remain fearless after a spat of bombings in the capital. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King said Jordan is forging ahead and stepping into the future confidently thanks to its workers in the various sectors. The King spoke in a May Day radio message to the nation's workers after he took a tour of an industrial estate in Amman to check on the condition of laborers. Prime Minister Abdullah Ansur also sponsored a May Day ceremony organized by the Labor Ministry. Khal has the details.
His Majesty the King comes face to face with Jordanian workers as the word marks May Day. Calling at the King Abdullah II Industrial Estate in Sahab, His Majesty checked on work conditions at the facility, which employs hundreds of laborers, wishing them well and expressing his support. His Majesty was briefed on training programs for the employees at a specialized center where they are trained in metal industries in line with market demands. The King also met several citizens who were able to find jobs through a national campaign for recruitment launched last year. His Majesty listened to suggestions from several workers on how to enhance the ongoing campaign in order to empower young Jordanians and provide them with training that will help them find meaningful employment. At a ceremony marking the day in the presence of the King, Minister of Labor and Transport Nidal stressed the ministry's commitment to enhancing the conditions of laborers in the country.
وهكذا انطلقت برعايتكم وتوجيهاتكم مولاي المعظم.
The national employment strategy began in June under Your Majesty's patronage. It was the culmination of his distinct national effort to combat unemployment and create opportunities for Jordanian job seekers. Leading private sector companies and institutions have done their part in this campaign, which produced thousands of real opportunities with salaries, wages and incentives. We in the Labour Ministry will press ahead with this campaign to create thousands more jobs through partnerships with the private sector in all the governorates.
Luay Sihwail, Director General of Jordan Industrial Estates Corporation, said Jordan is an oasis of stability and investment magnet in a volatile region.
Our industrial estates, spanning 5 governorates from Aqaba in the south to Irbid in the north, have witnessed a robust investment from various nationalities. Your Majesty, despite the wide belief of an investment slump, let me assure that new investment at the Industrial Estates Company has reached 52 projects in 2012, a rise of 80% from the previous year. These enterprises, exceeding the volume of 550 million dinars, have provided 1,500 jobs. I would also like to say, Your Majesty, that the uptrend remains this year. Furthermore, our operational sales have this year soared by 600%, which underscores our country's ability to attract foreign capital.
In a May Day radio message heard this morning by local radio stations, Allah expressed his appreciation for and pride in laborers for their efforts in building the nation. His Majesty said workers would remain a role model for the next generations and a source of pride for their distinguished contributions. Prime Minister Abdullah Ansur joined a Labor Day ceremony. Minister of Labor and Transport Nidal congratulated all the kingdom's workers, noting His Majesty's care for their conditions. He said the ministry has the key role of securing jobs for Jordanians and treating them fairly and protecting their rights. Khal for the news at 10.
The government said it will deliver on a pledge to hold municipal elections before the mid-September deadline set by the law. Minister of Interior and Municipal Affairs Hussein Majali announced that municipal elections will take place on Tuesday, August the 27th. The cabinet has asked the Independent Elections Commission to oversee the local polls. Majali said the Ministry of Municipal Affairs will begin preparations for the election in the next days. The ministry's undersecretary said electoral committees will be named as early as next week for preparations to kick off. The lower house will convene on Sunday in a session to debate deadly violence that took place this week at Al Hussein bin Talal University in Numan. The latest campus riots and shootings, which claimed 4 lives, dominated today's session, attended by Prime Minister Abdullah Nsour and cabinet ministers. House Speaker Saad Hail Sroor condemned Monday's deadly riots and their aftermath, saying the unacceptable incident has rattled the nation. He expressed sympathies to the victims' families and said no one wants to see such actions in our universities and centers of learning. Sroor said all should bear the responsibility to stop such incidents and stand up to the perpetrators to protect the country, citizens, and academic institutions. One lawmaker called for setting up a parliamentary committee to probe the deadly clashes, praising security forces for containing the riots. Another MP called for the release of students arrested after the incident and tighter security at campus entrances. He said the university's presidency should be held accountable for the violence. Interior Minister Hussein Majali told the lawmakers that most of the students who were injured in Monday's clashes were in good condition and will be discharged soon. Majali said 10 students are in police custody and 12 have already been released. Senate President Taha al-Masri discussed with a team of U.S. congressional aides parliamentary cooperation between the two countries and regional developments. Masri spoke about Jordan's political reform and democratization process and Washington's role in achieving Middle East stability. The Senate President thanked the U.S. for aid that helped growth in the kingdom. Lower House Speaker Saad Hail Sroor told the congressional aides the reform process has begun long before the Arab Spring. He also said Jordan is home to some 1 million Syrian refugees that had hugely strained the kingdom's limited resources. He said the exodus continued, urging the world community to help the kingdom and assume its legal and humanitarian responsibility towards the refugees. Qatar donated 1,000 mobile homes to Syrian refugees at the Zaatri camp. The caravans are part of a Jordanian-Qatari cooperation program to ease the plight of refugees. Zaatri, near the city of Mafraq, accommodates more than 170,000 displaced people. An explosion in downtown Damascus killed 1 person and wounded many others, a day after a car explosion killed 15 people in the Syrian capital. Jets also bombed several areas around the country, targeting rebel fighters. The Syrian leader appeared defiantly at a May Day ceremony. Farah Ajlouni has this update.
This is the aftermath of a Syrian airstrike on a headquarters of a rebel brigade along the Turkish border that killed at least 5 people and wounded dozens more. The attack targeted buildings belonging to the Ahrar al-Sham, a Salafist Islamist rebel unit fighting to topple the regime. The video shows white smoke rising near what is said to be Syrian refugees' tents, while another appears to show a fire near the border crossing with ambulances to the scene. And while the violence continues, President Bashar al-Assad visited a power plant on May Day and called on his allies to remain fearless.
We will not be afraid. Did you see the reaction of people in Damascus yesterday? They came out in an unorganized protest, and they could have been attacked with a second car bomb. We are now all standing in defiance. This is a challenge of whether we will cower in fear or remain fearless.
A staunch ally of Assad, the leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah group, Hassan Nasrallah, said in a televised speech from an undisclosed location that Syria's allies in the region and in the world would not allow Syria to fall into the wrong hands. He said Syrian rebels fighting Assad forces will not be able to topple him by force.
We tell you, the Syrian rebels, that you will not able to take Damascus and you are not able to topple the regime.
Syrian rebels have accused Hezbollah of fighting alongside Assad's forces, but the group has denied these accusations and said it was only fighting to protect Shiite villages along the border. Fighting between Shiite militants backed by Hezbollah and the Syrian rebels in border villages have raged in the past weeks, threatening to drag Lebanon into the Syrian conflict. The area is a key supply chain for Syrian rebels, making it important for Hezbollah to stop rebels from taking over Shiite villages there that would bring them close to Hermel, one of the group's strongholds. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
In the latest upsurge in violence in Iraq, at least 15 people were killed in a series of bomb blasts across the country. The sharp increase in violence has prompted warnings of a full-blown sectarian conflict. A suicide bomber wearing an explosives vest detonated himself in the midst of a group of government-backed Sunni fighters who were collecting their salaries east of the city of Fallujah, killing 6. In Baiji, north of Baghdad, police said a roadside bomb killed 4 policemen. A car bomb in a Shiite district in northeastern Baghdad killed at least 3 people and wounded 14, and another car bomb north of the city of Ramadi killed 2 policemen and wounded another 10. Tensions are at their highest in Iraq since U.S. troops pulled out more than a year ago. Protesters took to the streets in many countries on May Day, holding rallies, some turning into riots. Protesters from Bangladesh to Cuba voiced their woes, demanding their rights and better working conditions. Muhammad Al-Fuqaha takes a look at the day's events.
The global economical crisis sheds its lights on May Day in every country that witnessed May Day protests. In Greece, protesters rallied in the capital Athens after the country's 2 major public and private sector unions organized a 24-hour walkout. It is the latest in a long line of strikes and protests in the debt-stricken country, ravaged by its 6th year of recession and popular fury over wage and spending cuts. The president of the Confederation of Civil Servants Trade Union said his organization would continue to battle against the country's austerity measures.
Continue to fight to overturn this unfair and dead-end policy that is destroying millions of jobs on a national and European level and is driving large swathes of society to poverty and destruction.
The image in Turkey was different. People were injured when crowds of protesters converged on different parts of the city in the early morning and attempted to storm police barricades. Police responded with tear gas, which filled the streets of central Istanbul. Thousands of police were stationed across the city center to block access to Taksim. The Russian capital also witnessed a rally, but it was peaceful. Close to 1,000 Russian nationalists participated in a protest carrying black and yellow flags and banners and chanting "Go Russians." One of Russia's nationalist leaders said the action was aimed to attract government's attention to illegal immigration, which Russia suffers from. In South America, thousands of Cubans paraded through Havana's historic Revolution Square, carrying signs featuring the images of revolutionary leader Fidel Castro, current President Raúl Castro, and late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. In Asia, several thousand protesters in Bangladesh marched through the capital Dhaka, calling for justice after the collapse of a garment factory complex that left hundreds dead. Factory employees demand rights for women workers and an end to unsafe conditions. Muhammad Al-Fuqaha for the news at 10.
A session of Venezuela's parliament turned violent when fistfights broke out over the country's bitter dispute after elections. A number of legislators were injured during the scuffles. The opposition said 7 of its parliamentarians were attacked and hurt while protesting a measure to block them from speaking in the National Assembly over their refusal to recognize President Nicolas Maduro's election victory. Government legislators blamed their rivals for starting the violence, which underscored the volatile state of politics in the OPEC nation after the death of late socialist leader Hugo Chavez last month. Maduro defeated opposition candidate Enrique Capriles by 1.5 percentage points. Capriles has refused to recognize his victory, alleging fraud. The Houston Rockets beat the Oklahoma City Thunder 105-103, barely avoiding being swept in the best-of-7 Western Conference Series. Chandler Parsons tallied 27 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists to lead the Rockets, who were again without injured point guard Jeremy Lin. Kevin Durant led the Thunder with a groundbreaking 38 points, with Reggie Jackson trailing behind with 18. The series will return to Oklahoma City for Game 5.
Durant has to give it up. Nearly lost by Jackson. Jackson going in, trying to draw the foul. And Ibaka can't get it in.
Over to football. Borussia Dortmund arrived back home in Germany after completing their sensational roller coaster ride to the Champions League final yesterday. The team's performance left club bosses ecstatic as the team muscled their way back into Europe. Dortmund, on the brink of bankruptcy 9 years ago, have bounced back in style, winning back-to-back domestic titles from 2011 before launching their assault on Europe and reaching the final. Dortmund's goalkeeper said it might be best to face Barcelona in the Wembley final on May 25th to give an international flavor, but he was happy to face Bayern Munich as well. Finally, a look at the weather. Unstable conditions with cloudiness and a chance for scattered showers. Winds will be northeasterly moderate, picking up at times and blowing dust. Tomorrow it'll be more of the same, hot in most parts of the country, still with clouds and a chance for more thundery showers, southeasterly dusty winds, especially in the east and south. The Gulf should expect a cool night and hot day tomorrow with cloudy skies. Winds will be northerly moderate, picking up at times, and seas slightly choppy. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. In a May Day message, His Majesty the King says Jordan moves forward confidently, praising the nation's workers as builders of the future. Lawmakers condemn a recent spike in campus violence and say stopping riots is a collective national responsibility. And Syria's president urges his supporters to remain fearless after a spat of bombings in the capital. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.